As a retailer, I'm sure you will already have a significant number of policies and procedures in place in order to deal with employees, health and safety, property, and many other issues. You may even have a data protection policy already. As I've already mentioned, a retailer should be open and transparent with its workforce as to how it uses their personal data, and a policy should be provided to them setting out how their personal data is being used. A retailer will also need to have a policy in place to govern internally how it collects, uses and shares information obtained from all other sources, including its customer base. This is to ensure that the information that's collected through a website, in store or through customer services team is handled correctly. As already mentioned, it will be a separate task in order to ensure that those policies are adhered to in practice. One area to think about in particular is the use of CCTV in a retail environment. A CCTV policy should deal with the collection of video and still footage and ensure the data is carefully secured and any releases are controlled. Other policies to think about include a data protection breach policy, which we'll look at later on, subject access request policy, data retention policy, data subject request policies, so for example when an individual asks for their data to be erased or corrected, and data security policy, and on top of that, in worst case scenario, a disaster recovery policy. Now, it's one thing to have the policies and procedures in place, but it's another thing to ensure that your organisation demonstrates compliance. And as already mentioned, you will need to ensure that your staff are well aware of how the GDPR works in practice, so that those policies and procedures become the policies and procedures that the organisation lives and breathes by. And one method that I've found that works particularly well in organisations is to introduce the concept of Gdp Our Champions. So whenever you introduce any new measures, it can work far better if an organisation recruits and trains in detail a smaller number of employees who can then go out and spread the word amongst the workforce. They might also be trained to a level where they can deal with queries that, for example, then don't have to go all the way back up to the person who has overall responsibility for data protection, such as the data protection officer. And do remember that a workforce may also be made up of permanent and temporary staff, so you'll need to ensure that they are made aware of the GDPR requirements. Now, there isn't any specific requirement about training a workforce under GDPR, but it is part and parcel of being able to demonstrate compliance. Now, all companies train their employees differently. So for example, they may have information contained within a staff handbook, they may have an intranet, and it will be for the organisation to decide how best to make sure their workforce is brought up to speed with GDPR.